Hello and welcome to another episode of Leaders of Transformation. Today we have a great guest, Paul Edwards. And Paul and I actually met on LinkedIn and started to connect there. And then I was on his show, which is, he is the host of the Influencer Networking Secrets podcast. And so we had a great conversation and we have been continuing this conversation, and Paul has introduced me to some amazing people. And so I wanted Paul to come on and talk about his ability to connect influencers and so much more. He's an internationally known best-selling author, an entrepreneurial coach, as I said, the host of the Influencer Networking Secrets podcast, and he connects radically generous entrepreneurs with elders, peers, and mentees who challenge them and help them to grow through his Business Beyond Business Mastermind. He's a veteran of the United States Army, a Pacific Lutheran University graduate, and a recovering salesman in insurance. And in his spare time, he's an amateur men's physique competitor, an amateur theologian and Bible scholar. So welcome, Leaders of Transformation. Paul, we're excited to have you here.
Nicole, it's great to be here and good to be with you again, and excited for what we're going to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. And we've got a whole bunch of things to talk about because you have this diverse background and interests. So let's start off with telling us a little bit more about yourself and where you create, because this is the Leaders of Transformation, where you're creating transformation in the world, or how you're doing that.
Well, I would say mainly what's always bothered me, which has led to the transformative side of what I do, is I just, no matter what stage of life I've been in, I've always wanted more than I got out of most relationships. And I'm not saying that I was the victim party. I think probably people wanted more out of me as well than what I was willing to give. But there's an actual character and ethical reformation that has to go on, of which you and I know very well, in order for that to happen, in order for relationship with one's fellow man to be restored. And so I wrote this book, and I have formulated what I teach around those principles, around those concepts of the concept of being a radically generous entrepreneur, meaning someone who is in an entrepreneurial position or simply has that spirit, an entrepreneurial spirit, but at the same time recognizes that there's far more to business than making money. In fact, money is simply the reward that follows doing business well in a way that accords with the principles and laws that God has set out for human interaction. So I've simply, I'm not the first person to do this. I won't be the last, but I do find that it's a set of qualities that are not very common anywhere in life, and business is no exception to that rule. And I do find that business people who take this set of principles and integrate it into their lives and their interactions enjoy a very different kind of success. Part of it is financial, but another big part of it is simply influential and carries weight. And if you are a person who longs for that kind of significance in your own life as well as in the lives of people around you, then this book's going to resonate with you.
So it's funny because when you talk to people or you go on social media and you hear everybody wants to make a difference, everybody wants to have deeper connections. And to your point, it's like, yeah, but there's a disconnect there. It's like, we all want that. I remember living in Toronto and riding the streetcar, and, it's really packed, and of course in the morning during rush hour traffic and so forth. And people would always complain about how rude everybody was on the streetcar. And yet they were also rude on the streetcar. And it's kind of funny. It's like, well, okay, so you want other people to act a certain way, but you're not prepared to act that way. And it was like, why don't we start to be that? And as you start being that, people will also show up differently in those relationships, and and you can demonstrate it through that. At least that's what happened in that situation to a certain extent. Of course, you always have those ones that are like, no, I'm not getting off. I'm not moving to give you room. But so talk about, yeah. So you were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to mention, I was reading an inversion of this from C.S. Lewis yesterday. He talked about the difficulty of loving your neighbor as yourself. And, because it's not to be mistaken with thinking that your neighbor's actions are wonderful when they're actually deplorable. But the fact is, we already have plenty of experience doing that if we're honest enough to admit that we all have an inner wretch, right? We all have an inner jerk who we love anyway. Yeah. And it's simply learning to do that for other people besides yourself. But you already have plenty of practice doing it. You just have to do it for other people now. And so
we expect people to love us in spite of it as well. We expect that.
Oh, yeah. Right? Yeah.
Occasionally, we don't give it. Yeah.
Occasionally, I cut someone off in traffic. Most of the time, I'm a very conscientious driver. I don't cut people off. But occasionally, I make a poor judgment and I didn't look properly in my mirror that time. I give myself grace. Somebody else cuts me off in traffic. Well, that person's a jerk. And, no, I've worked, taken big steps to cure my road rage. So it's this is a micro example of it. But at a much larger scale, we have to do that. So what was your question you were going to ask?
I was going to ask you, so what are some of these qualities that are necessary and that you talk about in your book?
Probably the top three, because there's several of them, but some of them I think are attached to the other ones, whereas the first three are really stand out in and of themselves. The first one I call be a magnet, not a pusher. And that is to develop the kind of personality and the kind of approach to doing business that creates a pull that people move towards you, rather than you're just coming and saying, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, buy my stuff, right? Everybody, I have yet to meet the person who likes that. Even if that person is a pushy salesman themselves, all of a sudden when the shoe's on the other foot, they don't like it at all, right? The second one is we're literally embodying it right as we speak, which is pro bono publicity, right? And this is instead of walking around saying, my company's great, my product's great, my service is great, I'm the best, rah, 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 me, is you walk around promoting other people's businesses and other people's services and other people's products. And you exhibit a greater than average curiosity about them and about how that came to be and what problem it solves. And, doing those two things right off the bat is huge. The third one is what I call not for profit is for profit. And this is an integral part, especially if you're a subscriber of the Judeo-Christian tradition. But even if you're not, the principle is still going to apply. And that is that if all we're ever doing is selling our goods and services and expertise for profit, there's still something there's still a hole we leave, a gap, if you will. We leave that, and by extension, we actually end up leaving money on the table, though we can't approach this from the vantage point of making money. But going out and working together with other entrepreneurs, other leaders, other people in positions of authority to benefit people who can't pay it back it consistently was one of the best sources I ever had of getting reputation, referrals, and community recognition. And by extension, people called me up and asked me to help, with their insurance at the time. So those are kind of the three core principles, and then there's a few more besides that.
What's interesting is when you talk about generosity, most people are afraid. They don't want to give something to someone else. And you talk about the PR and people are afraid oftentimes to give to somebody else because they're afraid there's not going to be enough for them, which of course is coming from that scarcity mindset as opposed to abundance mindset. It's like people have said to me, well, Nicole, aren't you a coach? why would you have other coaches on your show? And, and in the beginning, when I was doing this podcast, I was thinking, should I have coaches on my show who are doing basically the same thing as me? And I thought, yeah, well, if somebody wants to work with them, they're going to work with them. And if they want to work with me, they're going to work with me. And it actually increased my credibility, because not only was I a coach then, but I was, and this was kind of like a side benefit, it wasn't why I did the podcast, but it became as a side benefit to it, was that I got known as an influencer who knows a lot of coaches and knows a lot of people. So not only an influencer, not only a business coach, but an influencer and a connector. And so it became more of a resource and more valuable than simply staying as a business coach on my own. So it's interesting. Yeah. And generosity is an interesting, so let's talk a little bit more about that, because, when you, the psychological, when you give to others, there's a shift that happens within you, right? Like how you feel. It's like, I love giving referrals. When I was in Toronto and I started my career in Toronto and was networking for years and years and years. And I was going to events and people would say, oh, I'm doing this or doing that. I'm like, oh my gosh, you need to talk to so-and-so. Oh, you should talk to so-and-so. And I went to BNI and, became very successful in BNI very quickly, got my investment back within 3 weeks. Wasn't the plan, but the reason why it happened was because I know a lot of people. And so I was able to give referrals. So when people were looking for referrals, I'm like, oh, if you're good what you're doing, great. Here's 10 referrals. Here's 5 referrals. Here's this, here's that. And then of course the reciprocation happened, but I wasn't looking for that. It just, did it. And some people would ask me and say, well, why are you doing that? And I went, why wouldn't I? Like, I know somebody that can use your services. Why wouldn't I send them your way?
Yeah.
And people would say, what's the best way to get a referral? Nicole, how do you get all these referrals? It's like, well, the best way to get referrals is actually to first give them. And then they come back. But you don't do them hoping that you're going to get something back. So talk about this generosity, this mindset of generosity, maybe how it developed for you, and how somebody can develop that. Because I think there's people that think that they're generous and aren't necessarily generous. They're doing it. They're like generous, hoping for something back. And there's a big distinction in the way that you actually show up and whether it is effective or not so effective.
Well, to speak to some of the examples that you just gave there, Nicole, whenever I meet people who do business the way I do it, right, with the model that I use. So people like Kevin Thompson, Adam Connors, Joe Mindak, who I just met recently, Aaron Walker. These men all are big strategic connectors and mastermind leaders, right? And I jump at the opportunity to meet them. So as a matter of fact, I'll just give you a real-time example. Yesterday, I got an email from Aaron Walker saying, thank you so much for introducing me to Joe Mindak, because Joe Mindak is running a mastermind in Hoboken, New Jersey. And I told Joe about a tool that Aaron Walker is rolling out that basically is top to bottom, left to right, head to toe mastermind facilitation, right? So facilitating all of the interactivity, how to build your mastermind from the ground up, scale it, et cetera, et cetera. He's got the blueprint on it. And I told Joe, you might be interested in hearing about that. Well, Joe, I met through Adam Connors, right? Who I met through Mike Roderick, who I met through John Corcoran, who you may know. And these guys it's all of us doing the same thing. I've had or am having all of these guys on my podcast, some of them more than once, just like you, right? These people would technically be my competitors, but I don't view them that way. And the reason I don't view them that way is that I know enough about myself to know that any other human being faces their limitations, right? I know that in my mastermind, all I ever really want to have is about 100 to 120 people. because get much beyond that, and I can't handle it. And the value, the service begins to get devalued, and I begin turning over too much of what I bring to it to other people who
Right.
may or may not have the same degree of interest and passion and commitment. So there's that. The other thing, that I noticed was, and when I first started doing this, I was you go from being a taker where you just take, to being an exchanger where you say, well, I'll do this for you if you do this for me, to being a giver where you say, I'm going to do this for you. I don't care what the result is. If you want to reciprocate, I'm blessed and I'm thankful, and I'll gladly accept it, but I'm not going to make that a condition of giving. And here's the interesting thing, Nicole. They did there was an article not so long ago in Success Magazine that says that the transition from taker to exchanger to giver is most prevalent among the very highest performers in society. In other words, everybody else who's, trying to climb that ladder is somewhere on the scale, but the people in the absolute upper echelons of success in our society are all majority, 85% or more, just givers. They just give it away. Who cares what the consequences are? If they're good and they come back to me, great. And if not, oh well, there's plenty of fish in the sea.
Interesting. Now, does the study indicate when they actually became the givers? Like later on or early on? You know what I mean? Because I can hear the objection going, yeah, well, sure, they've got lots to give.
Yeah. Well, and so to correct another dangerous assumption from what I'm talking about, there's always multiple ways to give, right? So when you are starting out and you don't have the treasure category, there's always time and talent.
Yes.
Right. And that's what is meant by this. It's not simply financial. I know people hear radically generous entrepreneur. They think some guy who goes to a Rotary Club and he's got nothing but bundles of money, so he writes big checks to nonprofits that he never works with. No, I'm not talking about that. Right. Here's a real story that I don't remember if I tell this one in the book or in the first version of my book, but when I first started in insurance at Liberty Mutual, there was an opportunity to go work with an organization here that helps people living in distressed homes keep up their properties. And we got to go down to a little town south of Olympia called Rainier. And there was this aging World War II veteran and his wife. He was mostly confined to a wheelchair. She could still walk, but they were in their 80s. And we got the chance to clean up their yard and do a little bit of work on their landscaping, some of the siding and the roof. They had some more specialized guys there. And we made a morning out of it. And the way I got to help was mainly using my hedge trimmer and then taking my truck down and getting a bunch of gravel, which we then brought and I shoveled it out into the driveway. Now, in quite aside from the honor of doing that as an Iraq veteran for a World War II veteran, right? You also spend that entire time talking with other professionals and getting acquainted with them and learning about them on a personal level, because you're not talking business while you're doing this, right? And so you build connections and rapport automatically with people that way. And that's where that referral power comes from. Now you've set yourself quite distinct from anybody else who does what you do. And I had plenty of challenges with that because, of course, in insurance, in a city the size of Olympia, you've got at least 500 to 600 people also doing it as well.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because first of all, like you said, it makes you feel good. You have the pleasure of doing it, the honor of doing it. But what you just talked about, which I think is an important distinction, is that you end up meeting people that are also doing the same thing, that are of the same mind of generosity and giving and so forth. And so like attracts like in that case. And there's also a bonding that happens when any emotional experience, that we experienced with someone else. That's why people who go through some traumatic experience, they will be more tightly bonded to someone than if it was just a transaction or a business transaction, because there's that emotional connection to it and you're more bonded to those people. Really, really powerful. So let's talk about because I know with being an influencer and connecting to influencers, there's a level of excellence in which you do life. And I know that you also are an amateur men's physique competitor, which I thought was really cool. And so let's talk about that spirit of excellence and living like a champion, if you will. Like, what are some of the disciplines? What are some of the things that you do? Generosity obviously is one of them, but what are some of the things that you do on a regular basis that I call it the winning strategy, right? It's like, when I do these things, life works.
Mm-hmm.
When I don't do these things, life doesn't work. And so I encourage
Yeah.
all my clients to identify, what is your winning. I'm not going to tell you what your winning strategy is. You got to define your winning strategy for yourself, because it's going to be different,
Yeah.
right? But what are those things that you do when you do those things? It's just like, that's living the champion life for you. That's living the life of excellence that you feel good about.
Well, I certainly believe every day for me begins the night before, which is to say, I don't go to bed with a million thoughts swirling in my head every night, because I write out whatever's swirling in my head on paper before I go to bed, right? Craig Ballantyne calls this the brain dump. And I started doing that. And once I got in the habit of doing it, there have been many nights where I don't particularly have anything swirling in my head, right? Because I just know that's on my calendar for tomorrow. I've put stuff on there throughout the day that I'm like, I'm going to get to that tomorrow, and here's when I'm going to do it. So a lot of people don't sleep well, because they have trouble getting to sleep because the brain becomes super active all of a sudden, right? So there's that. There's, I have a routine, and certainly spending the first 2 hours of every day of my life reading scripture, meditating, praying, journaling, and all of that allows me to clear the air and establish a peaceful platform from which to jump, right? To reach for my goals. So if your day begins in chaos, or if it begins where you leave all of that stuff up for grabs for whoever wants it, trust me, the kingdom of darkness will be happy to take it from you, right? If you're a believer. And if you're not, you could just attribute it to chaos, right? Whatever you want. In either case, it's a default setting, and only we can change the default by insisting on not doing things the way we've always done them. Once you have that foundation on which to build, my philosophy is very much based on isolation is the enemy of excellence. I stole that from Aaron Walker, but it's true. And I do spend a lot of time working by myself here in my house. And I notice that every time I get to spending too much time here working by myself in my house, entropy begins to come at me from different angles. Bodybuilding has taught me this. If you really want to build a muscle, you got to attack it from multiple different angles. You can't just do the same exercise over and over again the same way. So this, in the spirit, it's very much the same thing. If you don't begin to vary how you spend your day, and more importantly, who you spend it with, then you begin to narrow the source of the enrichment of your life as a result of your effort. And so when I was in insurance, that's all I did was network and take people to lunch and go to, serve on boards and stuff like that. So my life was never dull in the sense of input from people. And that's why I say, particularly with what I do, it has to involve a continuous flow of intelligent, meaningful connections and conversations. So hence the podcast, right? I want to be talking to people who are a lot smarter than me, like you, Nicole, as frequently as I can. As frequently as I can. I don't, and I want to put myself in this state of constantly having to adapt and learn newer and better and more effective ways of doing what I do. Otherwise, again, that default setting clicks in, entropy takes over, mental and physical breakdown are not far behind.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you find that your network is very much the similar type of people, in the sense of, because you are looking to connect with other super connectors, influencers, do you find that it's skewed to a certain type of person that you connect with, or do you have like a wide, diverse network of people that you learn from?
I would say that the biblical influence tends to be something of a dividing line for people. They might listen if they're not operating inside the kingdom of God. They might listen just because they find it interesting. But it's not necessarily a disqualifier. And I've never made this a specifically, I've never slapped the label of the cross on my business and said, you got to be a Christian to enter, kind of thing, right? If somebody comes into my mastermind, in other words, who's not a Judeo-Christian believer, they're quite welcome to, as long as they're not there to shut us down because we're talking about the Bible all the time, because that's what we're going to do. But I do find that this content, this mindset, this approach to life is seldom in the hearts and minds of people who are not in executive or entrepreneurial or leadership roles. So, for example, the people that I have attracted to the show, to the podcast, and the people who have voiced interest in being part of the mastermind tend to be people who are leading and influencing others who work in organizations underneath their role. Now, you can get people who are mid-level managers who have that mindset, and they too will be interested in it. But predominantly, this is who I've noticed tunes in and pays attention.
Mm-hmm. So what I'm hearing is there is a diversity of maybe perhaps, thoughts and ideas, but in a frame of a context of leadership and that executive role of moving forward. And I think that's important as a distinction, because sometimes, I think it's great. You can learn from anyone. And I've been able to learn from people at all different levels of success or lack of success. And there's also a saying that says you're known by the company you keep. So, so while I learn from a lot of people and I have a diverse network, the people that I have in my inner circle, I focus on are the people that are inspiring me, that are stretching me, that are growing, like you, right? It's like, wow, how can we take it up to the next level? And that's that spirit of excellence. So, great distinction. Now let's talk about your mastermind, because it's Business Beyond Business Mastermind. And you talk about radical generosity. You alluded to a little bit here. You talk a lot about the Bible. So give us a sense of what that mastermind is like. What kind of things do you focus on, so that somebody who's listening might be saying, "Oh, wow, that sounds interesting. I'd like to be part of that."
Sure. Well, there are about 3 or 4 different categories that I draw from in order to create this. It's almost a hybrid, if you will. I cut my teeth on masterminds with a group called the Agency Alliance back in 2014. This was an insurance mastermind. And while I got some good ideas for leveraging technology to generate leads, the main thing I got out of it was from working with Jonathan Garrick, who taught me how to duplicate myself online. At that time, Facebook was still in its continuing ascendancy, and it was not nearly as advertising driven. And so I was able to generate quite a bit of interest and leads and notoriety within Liberty Mutual as a Facebook lead generator by simply sharing my life, my personality, my sense of humor, photos of achievements of my family, that kind of thing, and not talking about insurance, right? So I took that into it. Then I was in Vince Delmonte's mastermind, and I observed a lot of really valuable stuff there. in terms of gathering a lot of people of the same or similar backgrounds into the same room and facilitating their connections, right? Facilitating their introductions. It's obviously a great thing. I also got a lot out of being a part of the Wild at Heart boot camp for Ransomed Heart Ministries with John Eldridge.
Great book,
that's
great book, that Wild at Heart.
Yeah.
And his wife wrote the book Captivating. So for a little plug for those two books.
Yep. And I have from that, speaking to the human soul, I think is a component that many a mastermind will bypass in the interests of not offending the people who are, who don't really want to hear about that stuff. And my philosophy is, look, you're free to plug your ears if you don't want to hear this, but this principle is going to apply to you whether you believe it or not, and I'll tell you why. Right? I take all of this, and I take all of the reading and all of the training that I've had going through Dan Locke's high ticket closer thing. There was a ton of great value to be derived from that. All of my own experiences and stories, and I'm creating this. Really, it's going to be a 4 or 5 day event, and there will be what you would normally expect. This is how to do this in 2019, which means that 6 months from now, you got to get back here because it's going to be completely different, right? And that deals with advertising, that deals with running your business, finding executives, recruiting the right people, building teams, developing product development, all that kind of stuff that forms the fundamentals of a business. But we're also going to do a day where it's got nothing to do with business. It's got everything to do with banding together to work on behalf of people who cannot help themselves, without phones to take pictures and show what a great bunch of people we are, right? Going out there, shoveling snow, digging a ditch, whatever, helping the help at a restaurant, et cetera, and just being extravagant in generosity. That's got to be a big component of it too. There's got to be some part of it where we're talking mainly about the limiting beliefs, broken mindsets, false agreements, and things that we've taken on. We're going to have a very spiritual component of it. And also, I draw a lot from Jason Gaynard's mastermind dinners concept. And my belief there is in curating and pairing up and facilitating interactions between people who I really get a strong sense from doing my homework about them that they can benefit each other.
Interesting. So we need to talk more, because I've got some ideas for events, and similar to you, it's like having both of these components and how do you bring that together. It reminds me of kind of I don't know why, it just reminded me of this, but it's not, they don't do masterminds, but what they do, it's K2 Adventures. And they work with people that are disadvantaged, even like with their mobility or whatever. And they take them, they're in Arizona, but they also take them to Mount Kilimanjaro and climb mountains. So, people with no arms and no limbs and, whatever, take them up the mountaintop. Like, that's pretty awesome. Yeah. And people love those experiences because they get to have their dreams come true. But what actually they do afterwards is fascinating, because afterwards they stay in the village when they come back down off the mountain, right? They stay in the village and they spend about a week there working in the orphanage and helping out and volunteering and so forth. And oftentimes what they said that's the part that people most remember. That's the part that makes them the greatest impact on them. It's not climbing the mountain, even though that's like incredibly awesome. But it's that aspect of it. And it's like what we were talking about earlier, is bonding together and having that experience together and being able to share and to lift up another human being or do something together is really, really cool. So to bring both of those things is the achievement, personal achievement, and generosity together. I think it's brilliant. So I
draw a lot on I draw a lot on my military experience for that, because
Mm,
I did months and months of that in combat in Iraq, and it's never been lost on me the kind of relationships you form as a result.
yes, yes. Now, you have something really exciting that you just shared with me yesterday about that's coming up in Boise. So, do you want to talk about that before we wrap up?
I have been invited to talk about my book and networking in particular with, oh gosh, now I'm forgetting it, KTVB, I think, in Boise, Idaho. So I'm headed out there on the 16th. Not sure if it's going to be a live broadcast or taped, but it will soon be available on my website. And wanted to mention that as well, Nicole, that for all of your listeners and viewers who would like to, I am giving away a free copy of Business Beyond Business. All you got to do is go to my website, which is thepaulsedwards.com. And you'll see a little pop-up box there. It says get your free copy. You just put in your email. If you don't want to do email, I'm not a big spam email marketer or anything, but if you don't want to do that, just reach out to me on social media. I'm on all those handles as well under the Paul S. Edwards.
Perfect. I was going to ask you about that because I knew you wanted to give that gift to our listeners, and thank you for that generosity. Again, demonstrating what you're talking about here is just giving it away and not requiring somebody to necessarily put an email in. And if people want to reach out to you afterwards, you know what they do. I notice that for myself. It's like, just if you want it, here it is. If you want to reach out to me afterwards, you will, and it'll all work out fine. So anyway, Paul, thank you so much. Final thoughts for our listeners, our leaders of transformation out there who are aspiring to make a greater impact in the world. What would you tell them?
More than anything else, I think the world is hungry for genuine connection. I'm seeing that everywhere, and the nice thing is it's a time and an era where the marketplace is really responding to that.
Yeah.
So it's my belief that if you respond to the hunger behind the hunger for a genuine connection, a meaningful relationship that starts with providing something that they need, but doesn't end there, right? You'll see some fantastic results from that. Vince used to tell me that people came to him for fitness, but they stayed with him for life because he didn't just offer how to do a better curl, right? He also cared about their souls and their marriages and their success in business and all that thing. And he cared enough to say, "Hey, I'm doing a mastermind group about this. I'll teach you how to form your own online fitness business, and it's top dollar, but it's worth it." So anyway, being very thorough and genuine and attentive to detail will carry you a long way.
Mm. Paul, thank you so much. I appreciate your time and sharing with our listeners. And we're going to talk more about the masterminds and what we can do together as well. Thank you also to our listeners and our viewers for tuning in. And I trust that you got some insight here from Paul. Go to his website and get a copy of his book. We'll make sure that there's a link in the show notes. So if you're driving, you can't write that down. There'll be a link on the leadersoftransformation.com, and you can just type in, there's a little search function, which I love about the website, which is you type in Paul and his episode, and of course anybody else, his name Paul, will come up, but you'll be able to find Paul Edwards there, and you can go straight to that episode. And all of the previous episodes that we've done, the 289 previous episodes, will all be there as well. Great insights from amazing influencers, and you can learn a tremendous amount about how to become a leader of transformation, how to grow your business, how to start your movement, and do what you were called to do in your life. So I encourage you to go to leadersoftransformation.com, find us on social media, follow us, and join our community and really get connected. Talking about connection, get connected into our community, because together we can make a greater impact. So we thank you for being here and appreciate you, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Leaders of Transformation real soon.